Welcome back to the Exempt List, part of the Zero Bliss podcast family. I'm your host, Charles McDonald, and we have a very special guest today that we haven't had on the show before, but happy to have him, ESPN's Kevin Clark. Kevin and I, we run into each other during the offseason circuit a bunch, even though we live not too far from each other. You used to live in New York, right?
We used to live in the same borough. Yeah. I live a little further north in Westchester County now, but we used to live in Brooklyn both,
yeah,
right?
So I'm still here. So I feel like one day, like I have so many people where I'm like, yeah, we got to get together at some point.
Someone's just got to rent a back room at a bar somewhere in Brooklyn Heights and just make it happen.
Well, not me. I'm broke, so.
Not me. It's not going to be me. I got a kid. I can't plan anything. But if someone just said show up at 4 p.m. on a Sunday, I'd be there in the offseason.
Yeah. How's your offseason been?
It's been good. I'm doing a little more TV, which is certainly exciting, but it's a lot of work. Like every show, getting the rhythms down is so hard of each show. And so like it's like prepping for the SAT every time you do it, because you're like, okay, on this show, I'm going to have to explain this for 30 seconds. On this show, it's going to be 2 minutes. And so it's actually been, I wanted to challenge myself. So it's been an awesome summer, but it's just been a much different workload than I'm used to.
Yeah, I've been trying to do the anti-workload. I turned 30 on Sunday, and I'm just like, man, my back
Happy
hurts.
birthday.
Yeah, thanks. You know, the first day of being 30, teenagers stole a package off of my porch. So I feel like that was, an introduction.
What was in it?
Well, if you're familiar with like maybe a glass pipe, sometimes you have to clean it every once in a while. So, it was something that they could actually get use out of, which is like, kind of frustrating because maybe they would open up, be like, oh, I don't want this. They could bring it back, but I know they're absolutely going to use it.
That's such a L because like if it was something for a 30-year-old, like back medication,
right,
or a new pillow, for your side, they'd be like, damn it, I wish we hadn't stolen this. They have no regrets about stealing your crap.
No, they don't. At all.
No,
they don't at all.
They might come back for more.
It was funny because there was like a line, or not a line, a sheet of paper on the front door that my elderly neighbor across the street wrote, saying that there were 3 teenagers trying to break into the second story of our apartment building, which is funny because I live on the first floor and my window was open that day. So they could have just walked in while I was just sitting in my underwear playing video games. But thankfully, they did not. That's an interesting place to start the show. And speaking of someone who could buy me more replacement of whatever was in that package that I lost, Houston Texans wide receiver Nico Collins got paid big time. And this is something that I didn't really see coming before the season, but I think after watching how last year played out, it makes sense. He was rewarded with a 3-year, $72 million contract, which is, I guess, like the new norm for bona fide wide receiver ones, right? You're going to be making in that close to $25 million per year range. I think it was over $50 million guaranteed. And now we still have more dominoes to fall in the wide receiver market. Justin Jefferson still doesn't have a new deal. CeeDee Lamb still doesn't have a new deal. T. Higgins is still trying to figure his way out of Cincinnati or figure out what's next for him. What are your thoughts on the Nico Collins contract and I guess the larger implications on what's next?
Yeah, I love it. And I think by the end of it, it's probably going to be a bargain when you consider how good CJ Stroud is, how good their connection is. It avoids an apocalypse if Stephon Diggs leaves next year, which with his new contract status, who knows? I saw some people today say, well, he's a 1-year wonder or whatever. 2 things about that. Number one is the stats last year were phenomenal. 5th in yards per reception, yards per target in the top 5, EPA per target. I think he was 2nd in the NFL. Great against, I saw a 33rd team kind of breakdown where he was elite against man coverage and zone coverage. I think only Tyreek Hill was better when you juxtapose both of those, when you blend those two together. And I think that the other part, and this is the major part, is that the first 2 years he was playing with at quarterback a bunch of insurance adjusters and bartenders. This was I had forgotten who threw the most passes for the 2022 Texans. So there were 3 players who started at least 2 games. Do you know who they were?
I'm gonna guess Davis Mills.
Yep, he was number 1.
Was Kyle Allen one of them?
He was, yes.
And Brian Hoyer. That's just my Texans guess. I don't remember the third one.
No. Jeff Driscoll.
Oh, wow. He's not even playing quarterback anymore, is he?
I
don't
I
think
couldn't
so.
tell you what he's doing. So Nico Collins getting 481 yards in that offense. I'm not sure you can draw many conclusions from that. So I don't know. I think Justin Jefferson and even T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, obviously, I think they have higher value than Nico Collins would. I think this is a sign, of just a smart kind of year by year build the Texans have, getting their business done early, understanding what they have, where they are right now, and not leaving until the last second, which some teams do. Like I always think that I do think planning is a little bit overrated in sports. I think teams kind of retcon their plans all the time. And they're like, oh, we did this because of this. It's like they're really just taking it year by year. But I think they understand the next couple of years in Houston can be really special. And I really thought, Charles, they were making a mistake when they traded that pick to get Will Anderson, for that pick to get Will Anderson. And I was like, why are they accelerating the timeline? They made me look like a clown, a straight up clown. And now I see the vision. And I think that, and I've said this a million times, but like, the thing about genuine, real deal franchise changing quarterbacks is they don't wait. And we sit around and like, I almost tweeted this the other day, I didn't, but like a power ranking of the angriest people on Twitter, right up there is fan base of a young quarterback that hasn't proven anything going into year 2 or year 3, where the jury's still out, but they've shown nothing. And very often, the sad reality is they're not going to pop. Because if you don't come into this league with the proof of concept, you don't gain it in year 3. Only Josh Allen and Troy Aikman have gotten good from year 2 to year 3. Anyway, this is a long way of saying, like, CJ Stroud proving this means he's going to be here for 10 years, but it also shows you what a genuine, real deal franchise changing quarterback looks like. Because we sit around and we look at these quarterbacks and say, oh, if he gets number 1 receiver, if he gets a running back, if he improves this left tackle, yes, there are circumstances that change everything. But for me, the most important thing is like, that's what it looks like. And when you have that, you do everything you can to build around him.
Yeah. And it's kind of exciting. Because I remember like going into last year, I was like, oh, this Texans thing could work out year 1 for CJ. Like, they got some pieces, but I didn't know Nico Collins was this good. I didn't know Tank Dell was as good as he was. But I would also say that finding a quarterback as good as CJ Stroud helps them be, the best of their abilities. And what I also like about this contract is there's been some discussion, especially right after the Diggs trade was made, like, who's wide receiver 1, who's 2, who's 3 once Tank Dell gets back. No, there's no questions who wide receiver 1 is now. I think it's Nico, and the rest of the pieces are going to fall as they may. And they've done a good job of setting this up. Now I just want to see, like this part of the contract situation is interesting to me when there's guys that are still left to sign their deals. Because if I'm Justin Jefferson looking at the Nico Collins deal, 30, like, because Nico's a good player, but like there's a tier separating him and Justin. It's like, what's next?
Completely agree.
Yeah.
Completely agree. It's not as much of a grenade in the process as the Christian Kirk deal was a couple years ago. Everybody was like, come on, man. Christian Kirk, come on, man. Like, Nico Collins is more in line with expectations, but I completely agree. I don't think that the market changed very much today for those guys. I think that certainly Justin Jefferson will reset the market. Then Jamar Chase will reset the market. With T. Higgins, I don't know. Like, first of all, good luck getting Mike Brown to do something he doesn't want to do.
Right.
Second of all, like, there's a proof of concept where they'll just let him walk. Like they did with Jesse Bates, where they were just like, all right, we're going to have you one more year. I think Joe Burrow took him to a UFC fight to be like, hey man, let's just do one last ride. And they just left. and I think with the Bengals, it's not that they don't operate like a normal team. They're just different. And I don't think that they're going to see, if they can't, like, it doesn't sound like just reading the tea leaves, listening to, like, I was on NFL Live with Jeremy Fowler the other day. Sounds like there's just not a lot of expectation that this is going to get done. It's almost like a baseball deal, where it's like, all right, man, you're in your walk year. And so they can have them for one more year and they can do something else. I mean, I was surprised, like, Tyler Boyd's contract was pretty low this year.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're comfortable replacing these guys and letting them walk. And so the Higgins contract is in a different bucket, but I I don't know. Until I see evidence otherwise, I'm assuming he's playing somewhere else next year, Charles.
Yeah,
As in 2025.
yeah, that's what I assumed you meant. But it's interesting when, because T is not the only one. I think the Dak Prescott contract situation is also really interesting, where you have someone just sitting here in what could be their last year on their current team, someone who clearly has a whole lot of value in a way where someone might be trying to get their hands on him if you were to dangle him on the trade market. So, like, it's always been interesting to me when teams just decide to do nothing, kind of. We're gonna play this out.
Well, the Cowboys don't take care of their business. Like everybody else, the Eagles have had a competitive advantage since Andy Reid was running the team, signing guys as early as possible. And even if you made a mistake, the contract is structured to where you're not going to be in cap hell for years because you signed them early and you had an advantageous structure. And there's guys who, the moment they're eligible to get a bunch of money are extremely happy to get money and will exchange a handful of things in the contract for that money, right? And the Cowboys have never learned a lesson on that, ever. They don't handle their business. They wait until the last second. And your colleague Jory was on my show earlier today, and I was thinking about it almost out loud, and I wish I'd put more thought into it, but I'm just a terrible pundit and content creator. But no, it was that I think what's going to happen is the Cowboys, who don't plan for anything, I think the Cowboys are not prepared for the salaries and the contract structure that's going to get thrown at Dak Prescott in 10 months? They're not prepared for it. Right. They're not doing the modeling. They're not understanding what true free agents can look at for Dak Prescott. Remember what it looked like for Kirk Cousins? Yeah. Imagine Dak Prescott where the perception and the play is a lot better. So I'm thinking, Charles, the only guard the Cowboys have against that, and I'm talking someone offering $70 million a year, right? Like, I don't know, like an owner that's desperate. The only guard against that is the teams that were likely to do that currently have a plan at quarterback. Mm-hmm. Currently, whether that's they've used a first-round pick on it recently, whether they've already done it and they don't have the cap space. That's the only thing keeping the Dallas Cowboys from just getting completely clocked in free agency next year. And I don't know where that goes. I don't know, like the Raiders might be desperate, but Mark Davis is not that kind of owner. David Tepper already is committed to Bryce Young, and I don't know if he wants to do something like that, and whether or not Dak would even want to go to the Panthers. What are the Titans trying to do? Like, it's that kind of thing where, the Commanders just spent the second overall pick on a quarterback, so they're not going to try to do that with make a splash. It's a totally different thing, but I just think that that's the contract I look at, that in theory, if something broke differently, could literally change everything about how we pay football players.
I'm going to use a term here that I know people are going to object to, but I don't mean it in like the most standard American definition. But when you talk about like wage suppression or the idea of it, do people have no idea how much these guys are actually worth because they never hit
wage theft?
Wage theft. Okay, right. For someone who's making $50 million a year. Okay, it sounds crazy.
I'm joking. Yeah.
These guys never hit the open market. If Dak Prescott actually walked into free agency, people will be appalled by the final contract figure that he could get because teams are actually bidding against each other instead of just, working within the construct of a CBA that lets them have control of guys for a long time.
And it's kind of random how things move forward. So, like, the franchise tag is the best bargaining chip in the history of sports. And the owners have it, and they will never give it up. And people are saying, "Oh, they should trade the 18th game for the franchise tag, non-starter. You're going to lose like 2 OTA days instead. How about that?" And so that's just how the owners view it. And the reason is they don't want a Dak Prescott hitting free agency. And once we see it, but then that's how it goes. Like in positions, it's almost random. Like the receiver market didn't move for years. And a lot of that's because with the tight ends, a Rob Gronkowski takes a little less than we thought he would, or didn't push it a year into free agency or towards free agency, and all of a sudden everybody's paid less than Gronk. It's that kind of thing. And so you need a player to, I know we overuse the term reset the market. You need a player to reset the market, and this would be resetting the market.
Yeah. I think that the Dak discussion, that conversation is a good jump off into what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about today. And that's coaches who might already be on the hot seat or are kind of like dead men walking into the season. If I
pre-fired, I call them pre-fired. Some of them were pre-fired. There's really only a handful of pre-fired guys, but yes.
If I was Mike McCarthy, I think I'll be feeling a little pre-fired right now. Because, dude, you got a $55 million cap hit for Dak Prescott just sitting there in the final year of a deal. I feel like that. I know we have guys who have walked into big time cap hits now, but he's the only guy that's in the last year of a deal that is sitting here with a cap hit that large. So obviously, like if you were going to improve your team and you were unsure about the future of Dak Prescott, I know it sounds crazy, but like you could have traded him for like 3 first-round picks to get some players who could play today and help you get things moving, or extend him a little bit and then drop that cap figure. But they did nothing this offseason personnel-wise.
They don't do anything ever.
Yeah. They didn't really do much.
Anything else. Like the Brandon Cooks trade, like was good, whatever, last year. Marcus Spears was on my show, Super Bowl, and I said, like, what's keeping the Cowboys from going to good to great, from good to great? And he said, look what the Rams did. They drafted well, and then they added pieces. They added Jalen Ramsey. They added Matthew Stafford. The Cowboys draft well, and they say, well, mission accomplished. They hand the little mission accomplished banner. They go on the aircraft carrier and say, we drafted well. We got some all pros. That's not how you do it. I mean, my old adage was always nobody wins the Super Bowl because they drafted a good quarterback. It's if they figured out what to do with the quarterback. I would say the same thing with the roster. Nowadays, nobody who drafts really well is in position to win a Super Bowl. You have to take that, and then you have to build on that. I remember for years, the whole thing was that the Packers, I think, had signed 2 free agents during Ted Thompson. It was Charles Woodson and it was Julius Peppers. The only when there was like a literal future Hall of Famer with gas left in the tank, they'd go outside the building. I think they had 2 guys who were drafted by other teams on one of their, maybe it was 2014 teams, and then everybody else either homegrown or an undrafted free agent. And I just think that's not the model anymore. The cap goes up, had gone up $10 million a year from 2013 until 2021. It's only going to spike even more. We understand how to use free agency as a tool, how to structure the cap and the contracts so that it doesn't put you in cap hell, as we talked about earlier. Like the Eagles understand how to do this. The Cowboys just don't do it. They just don't do it. The outgoing calls don't happen in Dallas. And that's what you need in order to take Micah Parsons and actually win a Super Bowl with them, is to add on to Micah Parsons and not say job's finished because we have Micah Parsons.
It's just a little baffling to me to walk into. I feel like this is an extremely pivotal season for the Cowboys.
1,000,000%.
And I would say that just based on where they are organizationally, they might have more pressure on them than last season. Just to show something and show that they can at least win a playoff game. But I just don't think they've set themselves up to do that. And now, like, Dak's an uncertainty, right? And I feel like his future being uncertain makes CeeDee's future uncertain. It makes Micah's future uncertain. To a lesser degree than CeeDee, because, he's kind of his own force of nature. But I just don't see how, if you're Mike McCarthy, that you feel like you've been set up to have the best season that you possibly can.
I think the pressure is all external. If they felt internal pressure, if the Joneses felt internal pressure, they would change the way they operate. And they've shown not one instance, not one hint that they want to change the way they operate. So I think it's just us being like, what the hell is going on with the Cowboys? It seems like at the start, they're like, things are great. Everything's good. We're rolling. We'll see how it goes.
Got Zeke back, guys.
Got Zeke back. Everything's good, man. Boys are back together. Boys are back in town.
Yeah. So Mike McCarthy, pre-fired. I'm honestly a little surprised that he still has his job after how some of the last few seasons have ended for them.
It's not his fault.
No, it's not his fault.
It's not his fault. He's won games. I don't think he's a good coach. I also think that it's a bad time to be a dead man walking, because regardless of what happens, it feels like after this year it's time for a reset. Whether that's Dak resigns for $1 trillion or Dak leaves, it feels like they're going to sit Dak down and be like, let's maximize you in those conversations. And it feels like Mike McCarthy's probably not a part of that.
Yeah. Mike Zimmer might be, though. Oh, man. Let's move on.
Al Harris. I was actually looking at potential interim coaches the other day, and I saw Al Harris's name, and people love him, so he could be in the mix as well.
I met him before. He's a nice guy. He's a chummy guy. Let's move on to Dennis Allen as we continue to talk about pre-fired coaches. I tend to think the Saints, I don't know. I thought they were going to do this last year. I thought they might just kind of ride out whatever is left of like the remnants of the Sean Payton and Drew Brees ending that they still can't seem to let go of, and then move on from Dennis Allen then. But, dude, they're still locked into Derek Carr for another season after this.
Awful.
Which is like, how does that happen?
I want to read you a headline from Mike Triplett. Does a great job.
Mm-hmm.
New Saints offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak literally went out of his way this offseason to make sure Taysom Hill knew how important he was to him and his staff. Kubiak flew to Utah to visit Hill and discuss his vision for the unique playmaker. How many years are we doing this with Taysom Hill? How many years? How many staffs? How many different quarterbacks are we doing this with Taysom Hill? This is really something else. I would have fired Dennis Allen after the Jameis Winston thing. And I'm talking about Jameis Winston turning play calling into a democracy on the last drive
against the Falcons.
The last drive of the game against the Falcons. And staging a mutiny, and Dennis Allen being like, yeah, I don't know, that's not what we do here. It just showed such a lack. And let's assume let's take at face value Jameis was telling the truth, and everybody on the team was like, we have to change the play call. That's an indictment of Dennis Allen, that they're like, we don't respect the coach enough to run the play as called, and we're going to run up the score. And it was basically unanimous. It was 53-0. And the only people who did not want us to do it are the people who are in charge of us, and we don't respect them. I would have respectfully moved on from Dennis Allen at that moment.
When I played college football at Gettysburg in my freshman year, we actually did do that to our defensive coordinator. We were getting mashed against the run, and he just kept sitting back in cover too. So at one point, one of our senior defensive linemen was like, dude, no, we're blitzing. No. We're blitzing. We're done listening to that. And at that point, our season was over because like it was really hard to come back from that. Just organizationally, like we straight up told you we're not running the play that you asked us to run in the huddle, and it was really hard to come back from that. Just like the whole shell of respect had been shattered, but we did end up having a much better performance once we started calling our own plays, which, maybe the Saints should try doing that this upcoming season. It can't be that much worse than what they did last year.
Did Gettysburg College move on from the DC?
A year after that, yeah.
We're foreshadowing for DA. They're going to fire Dennis Allen after he loses to Sean Payton on Thursday Night Football.
It's time. But like, also for the Saints, I would ask them like, what's next? Because you're still in this cap hell scenario because you keep kicking the can down the road. And I understand partially they have to do that just so they can become cap compliant every year. Like they have to do some of these restructures. But man, you think at some point you just rip the Band-Aid off, go, 3-14 if that's what it is, and then actually have a chance to build something for the future. It just seems like they're waddling around for no reason.
I completely agree. B, I think the Carr contract is the second worst in football after Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, I think that's
just
fair.
When you look at the lack of flexibility it gave them, the fact that we just knew, like, I just don't. Is Derek Carr raising your ceiling at all? Is he making you a playoff? I mean, clearly he's not making a playoff team, but it's just, even if Derek Carr is what we think he is, what is the money for?
Just to say you have a quarterback. That's what it feels like.
Just to say you have a quarterback. And I don't know, but you get that phenomenon if you just draft a random guy in the first round. Like the Vikings have the same feeling, probably have a better feeling than if they had signed someone like a Derek Carr, who, by the way, they just let a better version of Derek Carr walk out the door and go to Atlanta. So like, it was truly baffling what kind of market there is for just a guy.
Yeah. I really hope the Falcons don't lose to the Saints again this year. It's just I've talked out my neck so hard about that team, and I'm never going to stop either. Screw them. All right. Before we get to an ad break, let's split these two because I don't really think that either of them are necessarily pre-fired. Between Matt Eberflus and Robert Saleh, or Saleh, excuse me. Saleh is just, man, you're at the mercy of what happens on the field, right? Because if they have,
I think both of them are.
Yeah,
I think this is pass fail. I think Eberflus needs to win or he gets fired. I think Robert Saleh needs to win or he gets fired. I'm talking like double digit. I think both of these guys need double digits to save their jobs.
I thought the turnaround, like once the Bears got Montez Sweat, I thought the turnaround they had on defense might buy Eberflus another season. But I guess Caleb would need to show some progress and actually get them to 9 or 10 wins for that to happen, which I kind of think is possible.
I just think that, first of all, I don't know if I would have brought Matt Eberflus back. I just don't think I always turn it around and they're always like, well, you can't fire him. Well, okay, fine. Let's sit him down. And I just say, what's the best argument for you to keep your job? This is always what I say about Brandon Staley, and Chargers fans go, no, you don't understand. You're not smart enough. No, just explain it to me. Explain it to me. I'm not smart enough. That's why I'm asking you. Explain what you've done. And over the 2 years, I just haven't seen a lot here. And they were 20th in points. They were 32nd in points scored in the worst defensive football in 2022. They were 20th last year. Passing offense, I think they were 32nd in yards in 2022, 27th a year ago. I just want to know, like, what exactly is, if I'm asking, is this is the calling card of the Matt Eberflus era in Chicago? That's all.
Yeah, I guess. Well, the only thing that I'm latching on to is, like the last 10 games, the defense was pretty good, and you're a defensive guy. That's all I really have. I don't think it's a strong case. I just thought, hey, if Caleb is good enough to push them from like the 7-10 they did last year to a 10-7, but he's gonna have to keep doing his thing on the defensive side of the ball too, because I think that was really the only thing that made him the competitive football team down the stretch last year. I don't know. I'm a believer. I think I'm a believer in the Eberflus dream.
Okay. I also would point to maybe Luke Getsy being a bad OC.
Yeah.
And which, by the way, is the problem right now in Vegas, but is going to be a problem in Vegas. But like, you had a year where we all knew was pivotal for Justin Fields, and you just didn't do anything.
Yeah.
You just didn't do anything. And I think that's, again, I'm not trying to be like adversarial to Matt Eberflus. I'm just saying, and that's why he has to win. Like, we're giving him runway to win. And so go ahead. But if you win 7 games, I don't want to hear the quarterback was young. Like, at some point, you just don't. This isn't a jobs program. This isn't the Supreme Court. Like, at some point, you have to have something to point to keep your job. This is the NFL.
Yeah, where are you on the Jets in general? Because I feel like I'm in the same spot that I was last year. If this is healthy, this should be pretty good. But you're relying on a lot of things that haven't been known to be healthy in recent years. Aaron Rodgers, Tyron Smith, Mike Williams, great players.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you can make it through a whole season.
So I was probably a little too harsh on TV last week where I said there's no hope between Hackett and Rodgers. And I didn't really, I meant what I said, but I meant like, there's no hope that Hackett's going to help Aaron Rodgers. If they win, it's Aaron Rodgers is going to be a 40-year-old coming off an Achilles who balls out, who puts the entire offense on his back and plays well. I don't hate the idea that Sal is back, that Rodgers is back, that all of Rodgers' friends are back, because I really do think that the way they've positioned themselves, it's only fair that Rodgers gets to acquit some of the decisions that they've made with the one healthy season. Let's just see what this looks like, because it was just so unfair last year. And what happened with Rodgers is, it's one of the worst things that's ever happened to a fan base. Yeah. Like, to be that hyped, to say we finally got a quarterback, and then on the 4th play of the game, he goes down with a torn Achilles, where it was just so obvious what was happening. And not only did the air come out of the stadium, it came out of the franchise. And then they didn't have a plan, a backup quarterback, which, again, there was an element of like, we're screwed if we lose Aaron, and they immediately lost Aaron. And so I think that running it back, I would have brought in a different offensive coach, but it sounds like they tried to. But I do think that it is fair to let Aaron acquit the decisions that Aaron, the GM, made.
Yeah, I think it's fair. And I don't think they really had any choice but to just run it back and be all in again for this year. Because, well, I mean, if you're Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh, and especially Joe Douglas, like, you haven't won anything with being the Jets general manager. And I think that's kind of a shame because he's actually brought in a lot of good players that have made them, a much more credible team than they were in the past. But you keep missing on the quarterback. You haven't gotten that part right. Maybe this is a year where it's right with Aaron Rodgers, but this season, even like the old Jets stuff where sometimes I feel like they would get someone in there real fast and then just fire them because it wasn't working out. They've had the runway to try and make this work. Last year wasn't lucky for them, but I think at the same time, it's this year or nothing. And if it's not this year, then they probably got to start retooling what the future looks like and then finding yet another quarterback, which I know probably makes every Jets fan want to throw up.
So I think that's probably, they have 1 year, obviously.
1 year.
But then it's a bad year to be a fringe team in the AFC.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good teams in that conference. A lot of good teams. Like Buffalo, Miami, just in your division. Baltimore, Cleveland, Pittsburgh's in the entire AFC North. AFC South, Indy's going to be better than we think. That's not even getting into Houston or what the hell happens in Jacksonville. Tennessee's going to be better than we think. I think Jim Harbaugh, even though that roster isn't where it needs to be, I think that Jim Harbaugh is going to have immediate success with the Chargers. Like, man, there are a lot of teams that should make the playoffs here. And so being marginal, like Aaron Rodgers kind of has to ball out. And I don't necessarily think that Jets fans have that expectation, but he really does.
Yeah, he does. And it would just mean a lot. I mean, dude, I used to cover that team. It's been a long time since they've done like anything fun or really noteworthy on the football field, outside of just being like a laughing stock.
What was the last team Jets fans enjoyed?
I probably the Ryan Fitzpatrick season where they were just throwing up bombs at Brandon Marshall, and then remember Ryan Fitzpatrick tried to hold out the next season, and he showed up overweight, and then every Jets fan hated him after that. So you had 1 year.
Well, they also didn't make the playoffs at 10-6.
Yes, they did not. They did not.
The last time they made the playoffs, I was in college.
I think I was in 8th. Wait, what year is that?
2010.
Because I was in 10th grade. Yeah.
And now we're old. Now teens are stealing
right.
reports.
I used to be doing the stuff that the teens did to me the last time the Jets made the playoffs. All right. Well.
Did you see that stat the other day that the Jets are 5th in all-time AFC East titles?
Yes, behind the Colts.
On the Colts.
And the Colts haven't been in the AFC East since 2002.
2002.
Yeah,
it's a realignment.
I don't look. I would say I can't imagine being a fan of a team like that, but I'm a Falcons fan. Like slowly, Falcons playoff drought. It's getting up there. Because the last time they were in the playoffs was the year the Eagles won the Super Bowl against the Patriots when Keanu Neal kneeballed the ball back to Torrey Smith and they kicked the field goal before halftime. And they ended up losing. Just the outstretched fingertips of Julio Jones in the final play of the game. But enough sad stuff. Let's get to an ad break. We'll finish out the rest of these coaches, and then we'll get to some one and dones and guys to keep an eye on for the future. All right, we are back with Hot Seat Pre-Fire Coaches topic. We got 4 guys left that we're going to talk about. Kevin, I'm going to let you start. Pick a guy here. We got Brian Daboll, Nick Sirianni, Doug Pederson, Zac Taylor. Where's your brain feeling first?
We can talk about. So first of all, Zac Taylor. I just want to address this. We talked about it earlier with Mike Brown. If I see no scenario in which Mike Brown fires someone with years left on his contract.
Agreed.
And I also think that someone who's won at that clip, I don't think Mike Brown's going to fire. That's just not going to. It's just not part of the process. Remember how many Marvin Lewis years there were, where it was just like, oh yeah, this is getting a little stale, and they were like, whatever. he's back for another year. Like Zac Taylor is in a much better position, even though I think Marvin Lewis is an amazing coach. He should have got another shot after Cincinnati, but that's a different podcast. I'm gonna focus on Nick Sirianni here. I had Zach Berman on my show this week, and we talked a little bit about the tax you pay to be the Eagles coach, where the Eagles, in most years, the owner and the GM believe they've given you a really good roster and a Super Bowl caliber roster. And the tax you pay is that you can't really have an off year. And Nick Sirianni has to win this year. Has to. Mm-hmm. And I think that I would have thought and I guess he made the changes that Lurie wanted to hear made, where you're bringing in a new staff, you're bringing in Vic Fangio, who they wanted a year ago, you're bringing in Kellen Moore. I'm not really sure what the offense is going to look like. We'll put that off to the side. Yeah. I would have probably not retained him just because everybody, and I think Jalen Hurts was hurt. I think that was part of it, but then figure something else out to do. There's no excuse to start 10-1 and then just lose the ability, like the end of Rookie of the Year, to play sports. And that's kind of what happened. And your job as a coach is to be a problem solver. And everything was going wrong for the team. And I just didn't see a coaching staff that was like, oh, wait, I got this. Like in any area. And so I'm not on the inside. I don't know exactly what happened. And so it's hard for me to be like, they're idiots for not firing him. I'm just saying, if I was a consultant, if you brought me in like McKinsey and Company, I would have said, I don't think this guy, I think that there's better. And again, it's my line over and over and over again. They fired far better coaches than Nick Sirianni. And everybody, he has won double-digit games, blah, blah, blah. Andy Reid built a juggernaut there that just got stopped short of the Super Bowl a handful of times. Doug Pederson literally won the Super Bowl and went to the same meeting that Nick Sirianni went into, where it's, hey, what's your plan? And he came out of it without a job because loyalty to assistants or whatever. And that's just how the Eagles run things. They fired Chip Kelly after one bad year, and they didn't like that he moved the holiday party. So it's almost like British soccer-y, where it's like your expectation is you're competing for a championship every single year. And if you're not, that's on you. There are no other excuses. And so I think we know exactly what Nick Sirianni needs to do.
So the problem solver point is such a good one. I think it's something that I was thinking about all last year, because one of the most striking things about last year to me was just how discombobulated the Eagles offense was from times. And you were hired as a former offensive coordinator, someone that should be able to, tinker with these things and start putting the right foot forward. But it just felt to me like every time there's a problem that appears with the Eagles, whether it's, offense or defense or something else, it just gets delegated to someone else, or someone else gets in trouble, or, you bring in Matt Patricia to run your defense, which is like, dude, come on. Like that was the point to me last year. I was like, oh, they've lost the plot entirely, and they need to reset a good chunk of this, because no one should be making that decision ever. It's not quite a what do you do here type of deal for me. I'm not quite there yet, but it's also just like, when are you going to show the offensive mastermind that got you hired? Because right now it looks like that guy is in Indianapolis again with Steichen, and what he was able to do with Philadelphia. So it's weird, because I was
and Gannon being a little better than we thought as well.
Gannon, that defense was much more creative than I thought it was, and it was a lot more creative than anything that he had ever put together in Philly. So it's like we're kind of coming back to the same finger being pointed at the same person, and I just want to know. It was just so baffling for me to feel this way, where I'm looking at a team who's 10-1, and even when they were 10-1, I was like, yo, they might need to fire their head coach. But if you were watching the games, it made sense to feel that way. They're scraping by against bad teams, and then I think at the end of the season, speaking of Gannon, the Arizona game where Kyler, who's like 3 games back from a torn ACL that he came back early from. is just dicing you up and down the field, and a Cardinals defense that's in full rebuild mode kind of shuts you down in the second half of that game, that's when I would have been like, okay, we probably gotta look at something different here.
The other part that's working against him is it's a good job.
Yes.
And Bill Belichick's going to want it. Mike Vrabel's going to want it. Whatever hot coordinator comes up is going to want it. Maybe that's Ben Johnson. I don't know, but they can find guys. I also think they like finding guys. Like, Berman made the point, like, remember, I think he said that Chip Kelly was the only coach they've ever hired who had other interviews during that cycle. Like, they like finding the hidden gem, and they probably believe pretty strongly in their ability to find another one.
Yeah, and I would too. I would too if I was them.
And if they don't, even if the new guy's a goober, like, they're going to give him a good roster and he can win 12 games with them. Like, that's the point, is that when you're good at your job at roster building, you can find anybody. So if you can't fix it, someone else will get the opportunity to do so.
Let's get to the last two coaches on this list. I want to talk about Doug Pederson with the Jaguars because I think it's really interesting. Where it feels like I'm still really high on Trevor Lawrence. I'm not sure where you are, but to me, it feels like they've been given the key to like a Ferrari and they're choosing to drive at like 40 miles on the highway. It just feels like there's so much juice. There's a lot of juice left to squeeze with what Trevor Lawrence has been so far. And the frustrating part to me is I thought Doug was going to be the guy to do that based on what he had done in the past and like just getting the best stretch of Nick Foles football that we've seen since like Chip Kelly, enough where the Jaguars felt like Nick Foles was going to be the savior of the franchise. I'm trying to figure out where that Doug Pederson is, who was kind of seen as one of the more innovative offensive minds going up into that Super Bowl run. And he even had some solid years after that, but it's just been a dud so far where they just feel like the most mediocre team in the world.
It's really funny you mentioned the Jonathan Gannon, Shane Steichen, Sirianni thing, because a lot of this happened with the Nick Foles Super Bowl where the whole thing was, oh, it's Frank Reich. Then there was actually a narrative that it was John DeFilippo at one point. It couldn't be Doug Pederson. Then Frank Reich gets says, oh, well, maybe it was Doug. Like the credit assignment is always very funny with the Eagles. And I think the actual answer is Howie Roseman. Like Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie are actually people who deserve credit. But on the coaching side, it's very funny to see how that narrative has changed and who was responsible for what. Having said that, I said on Mina's pod last week that the Colts are better than the Jaguars. Pretty solid in that belief, in the sense that they had the same exact record last year, and the Colts did it with the backup quarterback, not just a backup quarterback, but Gardner Minshew, who's fine, but they were able to scheme up, win games they shouldn't, and the roster is better. And I don't think that the Jaguars' offseason additions were so good that they're going to catch the Texans or anything. I think they're going to be about the same, and I think the Colts end up winning more games because I also think the ceiling on Anthony Richardson's really, really, really high. I don't know if Doug Pederson is necessarily at fault here because Trent Baalke's a bad GM. Trent Baalke's misplayed a bunch of stuff, and Doug's going to be held responsible because Trent Baalke survives anything. We've seen that. Like, he got Jim Harbaugh fired. He said, like, he changed the course of college football history by outlasting Jim Harbaugh. Trent Baalke's going to survive this. And Doug Peterson's going to get blamed because Trent Baalke's going to start his little finger routine in which he starts saying, oh, well, Doug's not doing this, Doug's not doing this, Doug's not doing this. But I'm waiting. All I'm doing, I have such a soft spot for the Jaguars. I grew up two hours down the road. I went to a bunch of games when I was a kid. We have friends who are Jaguars fans. Mm-hmm. I'm just waiting for the hope to kick in. Like, again, if I'm just putting it to you, Doug and Trent and Chad, just tell me what I'm supposed to be excited about this year. Because I just in this year of Trevor Lawrence, it should be a lot higher. I don't. So I read your column on Trevor Lawrence. I'm between you and Orlovsky. Mm-hmm. Like, I kind of am of a belief. Maybe it's stupid of me. I'm of the belief that if you have to debate whether or not to give somebody $50 million, you probably shouldn't do it. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, if you're getting there, should we do it? Should we not do it? Should we pull the trigger? You're almost like, it's certainly not the Derek Carr zone, but I'm just saying, like, what's better? Paying $50 million for a guy you might not be sure of, or playing the lottery again, so to speak, and just trying to go into the draft and quarterback. I mean, and part of that is where they would pick next year, how bad they are, what Trevor Lawrence looks like this year. I'm going to advocate against what I said about Dak Prescott earlier. I would wait as long as possible to sign Trevor Lawrence to a deal. I don't think he's necessarily going to make you pay if you draw the string out.
Yeah, this is where we're different because I'd be trying to sign him today. But I also do think that he can be a lot better. But that's also what's kind of exciting to me. It's like the idea of the unknown. You might not get there, but if you do, like, you're probably feeling.
You can do that without spending $200 million. You know that, right?
But won't
you don't
it just
have to
be
spend
worse?
$200 million to get the unknown. It might be worse.
Yeah, but
so might.
I'm about to say, what if you walk in and Trevor blows it out the water this year? Now you're paying like 60 plus.
Let me ask you a question. Are the Arizona Cardinals right now on May 29th, 2024, happy that they signed Kyler Murray to the extension he has?
Yeah.
Okay. I generally think there's two separate questions here. Kyler Murray is worth that money, but where are the Cardinals in a life cycle where having him makes them like a Super Bowl contender? Like,
I think we'll find out a lot about that this year.
Sure.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, like, I don't see the quarterback contract and the life cycle of the team have to match up.
Mm-hmm.
And like the Cardinals thing is problematic. Like the process mistake was, like, Steve Keim had said literally last year that if he had taken Bosa, he would have gotten fired, and Kyler got him a contract extension. Even though Bosa at his position is better than Kyler Murray, it's just you're resetting the clock, all of that stuff. The Cardinals made a million mistakes that have nothing to do with the Kyler Murray thing. I'm just saying, if you're committed to a quarterback, but you're also just not aligned timeline-wise, by the time the Cardinals are going to have a roster ready to win significant stuff, they're going to have to either extend him or get a new quarterback. This would be two years from now. I'm just saying, I don't see the Jaguars. These are separate things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying you have to check your spot in the landscape before making any of those decisions, I think.
Yeah.
About whether or not to give somebody $50 or $60 million, which you might be by the time next year. That's all.
No, I do think, like, roster wise, the Jaguars are like in no man's land. Like, I don't the Josh Allen, Calvin Ridley bungle this year, I think really, really set them back. Because now, like, when I look at this offensive supporting cast, especially like at receiver, there's nothing really special here. We talked about the Christian Kirk contract earlier. They signed Gabe Davis. They drafted Brian Thomas in the first round, but I don't know. It just feels like they've taken a step back there. So that's the only thing that I would worry about if I was Jacksonville. Like, have we actually done enough to set Trevor Lawrence up where we can have this type of success that we expect of him? But once you're asking yourself that, I would imagine you're probably pretty close to getting fired. Like, have we actually done the thing that we were supposed to do over the past 3 or 4 years? And you get here and you're kind of misusing resources. I don't know. So Doug might be pre-fired just in the sense that, they haven't been given the pieces to maximize whatever this window was supposed to be, especially given the expectations coming off of the disastrous Urban Meyer season where he didn't make it all the way through.
I agree. Let me leave it here. If this season blows up, most of the blame should not go to Doug Pederson, and it should not go to Trevor Lawrence. They will get blamed because of the way modern media works, but it is squarely on Trent Baalke.
I agree. Last coach we're going to get to before we get to some one and done potentials. Brian Daboll, head coach of the Giants, and this is one guy I feel like my opinion changes on him every single week based on what's happening with the Giants season. But what would you say is the case for him being pre-fired or potentially on the preseason hot seat? Just
this one is the easiest one to make. Win.
Yeah.
That's it. And I think you need to, if you're a Mara family member, you just sit him down and say, whatever you need to do to win. We don't care if you start Daniel Jones. We don't care if you start Drew Lock. We don't care if you feed Malik Neighbors 20 targets a game or not. I mean, first of all, like, the wide receiver history since Odell left is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Kenny Golladay, I think, led the team in receiving yards a couple years ago with like 500. And I think having Malik Neighbors there is going to change some things. But you just say to Brian Daboll, you do whatever you need to do with the quarterback position. Just win games. Just win us. I'd say 10 games would save you. And I think a dignified 9 wins. I think the Mara family, they've made a lot of coaching hires, and they've made a lot of bad coaching hires. They Pat Shermer, Ben McAdoo, Joe Judge. I think they're going to lean towards trying to keep this guy around because they can't just keep rebooting every couple of years. And so hopefully, I mean, it sounds like maybe he doesn't get along with everybody on staff, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm going to default towards the Mara family being like, all right, just show us something to keep you. I don't think he's pre-fired because I don't think they want to do that.
Right.
Like the Eagles, I think the Eagles kind of like doing it. The Giants fans are just like, no more. Let's just get a guy. And that's also why I think there was so much reluctance, opposite reluctance, so much excitement over Daniel Jones when he just showed you the bare minimum a couple of years ago, because it felt like comfort, which is something the Giants haven't had in a decade. And since, I mean, they had that kind of flash in the pan season in 2016, but or 2017, whatever year they were briefly a Super Bowl contender, probably 2016. But I just feel like the Giants fans, Giants ownership, they want to see something. I don't think they're going to go in with a negative viewpoint of Daboll going into the season.
Yeah, I do think the Giants are fascinating and where they are right now, because they're like, to me, they're the poster child of all the wrong lessons to take away from a season where you barely scrape by.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they barely made the playoffs. They go to Minnesota, they beat the Vikings, and then they just get their absolute doors blown off by the Eagles. As the Eagles are making their run onto the Super Bowl against the Chiefs. And then they kind of just doubled down on everything they had there instead of taking like a longer look in the mirror. Like, damn, like we were winning every game by like 1 or 2 points. No, we're fine. And now they're in a situation where that kind of flipped back. Daniel Jones got hurt. The offensive line last season is one of the worst offensive lines I've ever seen at the NFL level. A lot of that was due to injury, but still not a whole lot of NFL caliber play there. So I think they need to win too. But I also don't know if winning is a realistic expectation to have of this team on the outside. Like, if I was internal, yeah, we got to win. But me looking at this from afar, I don't really see a whole lot of winning on this roster right now.
Neither do I, but that's what the money's for.
That's what money's for, right? Now, if the Giants were willing to give me some more money, I'll stay 17-0, or just give me any money at all.
If you're in year 3, I've always felt like you should have a proof of concept, and Daboll had it, so he's exempt from this. You should have a proof of concept for you as a coach by year 2, by the end of year 2. Show me something. Even if that's December, 4-game winning streak, let's go, 3-game winning streak, hey, everybody was believing. Show me something. And I think going into year 3 with a quarterback on a veteran contract, I don't think there's a lot of excuses for a legit bad year. I really don't. Unless it's a season from hell injury-wise, you have to know your limitations as a roster. You have to know the holes in the offensive line. You have to know if you don't have a running back. You have to know if you only have one receiver with 2 arms. You just have to understand what that all looks like. That's literally coaching. I mean, it's like the Mike Tomlin thing from the Pivot podcast, that most coaches run away from coaching. He runs to coaching. And that if the guys didn't need coaching, they would make a lot, the coaches would make a lot less. And so, like, there's an element of just do your freaking job, man.
Yeah.
That's not about Daboll. That's about all these guys. Where it's like, I don't, when it's like, they can't possibly win a bunch of games this year. Oh, okay. Well, unfortunately, that's a job description.
All right. It's been that was good. That was very productive. And I think we covered a lot of ground with the coaches and where they could be this time next year. And who knows, maybe they'll be on a podcast with us this time next year. But let's move on to guys who are just hired. And I think this is interesting. I want to talk to you about one and dones, because it used to feel like something that was a little bit more taboo than it is nowadays. Since 2020, we've had 5 coaches get fired after one season. And there are extenuating circumstances for each of the 5. But Urban Meyer with the Jaguars in 2021. David Culley.
In a bucket of his own.
In a bucket of his
you know how
own,
like
right.
everybody's like, you can't compare anybody to Michael Jordan. You can't do it. Do not compare anybody to Michael Jordan. You cannot compare anybody to Urban Meyer's one and done tenure.
Dude, that f***ed up his whole career, bro. Like, because you couldn't tell me that after that he got fired. Some college was like, "Oh boy, Urban's out there. We could do this.
Urban.
We could do this."
Yep.
And you
not even Auburn hired him.
Right, and they hired.
That's how bad it was.
They hired Hugh Freeze.
When South Carolina fires Shane Beamer after this year, they won't even call Urban Meyer. That's how bad it is.
Oh, but so 2021 gave us 2 one and done. So Urban Meyer and David Culley. 2022, we got Nate Hackett and Lovie Smith. Last season, Frank Reich. So this is something that's not. I guess this is something that NFL teams are not afraid of anymore. So recent history would suggest we might get one this year. We've gotten 1 or 2 in each of the past 3 seasons. And prior to that, it was Freddie Kitchens and Steve Wilkes in 2018 and 2019. So this is a more common occurrence than it used to be. So the 8 head coaches we have that were hired this year: Dan Quinn with the Commanders, Raheem Morris with the Falcons, Gerard Mayo with the Patriots. The Panthers hired Dave Canales, Brian Callahan with the Titans, Antonio Pierce with the Raiders, Mike McDonald with the Seahawks, and Jim Harbaugh with the Chargers. Of those 8, which one of these would you say has the highest chance of a one and done? We talked about it a little bit before the show, and I think my answer is going to be different than yours.
All right, so I just want to throw out a couple before I get to my answer. First of all, you cannot rule out Dave Canales because
that's going to be my answer.
Yeah, all right. Can't rule it out, but I'm not going to lean towards that.
Right,
okay?
right.
The other thing is Antonio Pierce, only because I just want to throw that out because Urban Meyer to me, and I wrote this when I took the job, it was pass fail for him. Either he was into it or he wasn't into it. Like Jimmy Johnson was all about it, right? All about the pro game. Nick Saban realized he couldn't control his own destiny, immediately hated the NFL. Lou Holtz, when he resigned as Jets coach, literally said at the press conference, "God did not put me on this earth to coach pro players." Literally said that. And so with Urban, it was like either he was going to embrace it or he wasn't. There wasn't going to be like an 8-win season from Urban. It wasn't going to happen. It was either going to be 12 wins or 2 wins and gets fired, right? So that's sort of the pro version of this. And by the way, Antonio Pierce was a Arizona State coach and all that stuff, but he obviously has way more pro experience because he's been in the locker room. For me, Antonio Pierce is either going to be a roaring success or it's not going to go well. Like I don't like the OC hire, but I also think that Antonio Pierce understands players enough to connect with them. And I think that there's Vrabel potential, but perhaps Vrabel potential, which didn't rely very much on the offensive side of the ball there for a little bit, even though Arthur Smith did better OC. Anyway, for me, it has to be Dan Quinn. Mm-hmm. And I was surprised because Mina and I talked a little bit about this. Mina brought it up last week, and I kind of co-signed that it's possible. You're talking, and we got a little bit of heat on DC, I guess you call it radio. I don't know, DC media. Saw a little bit of that. Unfortunately, guys, you're talking about a candidate who was not the first choice with a first-time owner, a first-time GM, and a rookie quarterback. Maybe I'm the stupid one. Explain to me why this isn't a volatile situation that would result in perhaps, I'm not saying anybody is likely to get fired year one. It's actually an uncommon occurrence. I'm just asking, explain how there isn't a scenario which leads towards a week 11 firing if everything goes wrong. That they're going to say, hey, we know, we love Dan Quinn, we believe in his vision. Like, explain to me how you can rule that out in May of 2024.
And this is so different than any recent situation that Dan Quinn's been a part of. Because when he got to Atlanta, Matt Ryan was in his 7th year and had already made Pro Bowls and been on playoff runs before that. And then, you hired Kyle Shanahan, who, as we've seen, has been one of the defining coaches of this past decade of football. This is not that, man. This is not that. And I remember when I was, watching all these Dan Quinn Falcons games, because that's my team. You'd end up in so many of these circumstances like, dude, what is going on here on defense? There's not, it didn't really, unless they had the talent, which they only did for like one season, kind of in 2017, they were getting cooked on defense, no matter who they played. And I remember when he hired Cliff to be his OC in Washington, I was texting, group chat with, Den Solak and Steven Ruiz and Nate.
Who?
I was like, he hired Cliff because back in 2018, when Kyler was a rookie, they absolutely shredded the Falcons for like almost 40 points and like 500 yards. And then he referenced that game when he got up on this podium and was talking about Cliff. I was like, dude, this is not good. This is not good because Cliff is no Kyle Shanahan. And Jaden Daniels yet is not as good as Matt Ryan. So I absolutely think this is a disaster scenario this season where they're looking at like 2-9 going into, November and December. It's like, whoa, this guy wasn't even my first choice. We might have messed up here. Let's rectify that. And I also think, these guys who are getting into the ownership game on the NFL level, like David Tepper, the Walton family, they have so much money that it's not really a big deal for them to take the hit and fire someone a little bit early and kind of keep it pushing to something that I want. So I think this is, like, I'm with you. I think this is a very tenuous, volatile situation, and I hate it because I think DQ is a good guy, but it's easy to see where this goes south pretty quickly.
Completely agree. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying it's likelier than other scenarios.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to happen in Tennessee. Answering the question, Dan Quinn is the most likely candidate.
Yeah, I was going to go with Canales just because, I mean, it really has nothing to do with him. It's just all about to do with Tepper at the ownership level. I think we've obviously seen professionally and off the field, he's a very volatile person, talking about Tepper. So, if they get to the end of the season and this is 5-12 and it kind of looks the same as last year, I wouldn't be surprised if he pulled the trigger on that and said, let's move on. Only because at head coach and quarterback, Tepper has shown no modicum of patience whatsoever, except like the patience he's kind of been forced to by spending all those assets on Bryce Young and being forced to see it out for at least 2 years. Like once you get through this year, if it still doesn't look good, you can kind of move on. But he was forced into this level of dedication towards some entity that he hasn't had before, only because he couldn't help himself but to spend and go get it. So Canales, like you got to take the head coaching job, but Tepper just seems like a crazy dude to work for, man. Like absolutely insane. That's all I got on the Canales bit. Yeah.
There you go.
All right, before we get out of here, any lesser known guys you think could be a head coach this time next year?
Yeah. I think Shane Waldron, if he does a nice job with Caleb Williams. I mean, you look at Bobby Slowick, who's, immediately got buzzed because CJ Stroud popped under him. Does that even have much? I don't know how much has to do with Bobby Slowick and how much it has to do with CJ Stroud looking like he did against Georgia for an entire season. Doesn't matter. So Shane Waldron, got him circled. Zach Robinson in Atlanta. We know the only question mark I don't have is the quarterback room. They're going to have some talent there. I think Zach Robinson with that offense, very similar to Bobby Slowick. He worked at PFF once upon a time. Interesting guy, and I think that's one to circle. And then Denard Wilson, the new DC in Tennessee. I just think Foxworth, I think was his college teammate or pro teammate. I'm not really sure where. Has been raving about him for years, and I've been listening to his interviews. He was just on Chris Long's podcast a couple of weeks ago. I think he's a really bright guy, and I think that Tennessee team, it's interesting. I think that Tennessee team has a lot more talent than maybe we are thinking, and I think they could be a little better than what the narrative suggests, and that's a really good way to get a head coaching job.
The name I was going to throw out was Anthony Weaver, the new Dolphins defensive coordinator. He interviewed for a lot of jobs this past winter, but wanted to get somewhere where he could actually call the plays this year, and they got some pieces, so it could work out. And they're gonna have the spotlight a lot, so I'm interested to see what kind of happens there. All right, Kevin, appreciate it. You got anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
Yeah, this is Football in Omaha Productions. We have Jory and Zach Berman on this week to talk about what the hell is going on in the NFC East this season. ESPN TV, the NFL Live, Around the Horn. They got some other stuff. coming up next month I can't talk about yet. But yeah, just turn on ESPN and keep it on, and then sometimes you'll see me.
Big time. It's been really cool to see you blow up, and I love watching all the Omaha production stuff. It's a lot of fun.
Appreciate you. All love to Peyton and Eli, man. They know what they're doing.
All right. Thanks, Kevin, for joining us this week. I will not be back next week. I am going to...
Wow.
What?
Where are you going?
I'm going to the Outer Banks with my family. My mom's...
There you go.
It's my mom's birthday, so we're going to go up there, celebrate.
That's a big NFL vacation spot. You probably see a bunch of GMs and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They
love it.
Big time out there at the Outer Banks where you got to... Like, the closest airport's like 2 hours away by car.
Yeah.
But yeah, no Exempt List next week. You'll get the Zero Bliss podcast with Jason Fitz and Frank Schwab back on this feed tomorrow. I'm Charles McDonald. You can find me on Twitter at 4Verts. You can find Kevin on Twitter at @ByKevinClark. I want to say.
That's right.
And then our producer, Colin, you didn't write your Twitter account down here, so I don't remember what your ad is. But Colin Brennan, ace producer behind the scenes, and we will see you in 2 weeks.